He spent 3 years in the confines of the Peter and Paul fortress. Afterwards, he was moved to the castle Schlüsselburg. It was here that he suffered from scurvy. All his teeth fell out, yet he found some relief in mentally reenacting the legend of Prometheus. Following the death of Nicholas I, the new Emperor Alexander removed Bakunin's name off the amnesty list. In February of 1857, of 7 years in exile, or in prison, his mother's pleas were heard by the emperor. Bakunin was sent to permanent exile in the western Siberian city of Tomsk. It was here that Bakunin found and married Antonia Kwiatkowska, the daughter of a Polish merchant. During this time, he also received a visit from his second cousin, General Count Nikolai Muravyov-Amursky. The cousin, this General Count, had been governor of eastern Siberia for over 10 years and quickly grew to like Bakunin because of his liberal sympathies. The two became closer, and Bakunin was eventually hired to work for the Emmer Development Agency. His title, a commercial traveler. He quickly grew bored of this, in contrast to the type of activist work he was doing before, and he was making hundos, so he was racking in money, and he was planning something, right? Contemplating his escape from exile, he got the General Count governor's permission to leave under company business, as he called it. In June of 1861, he found his way to a Russian port on the far east side of Siberia. Abandoning a company Russian merchant ship, he eventually persuaded his way onto an American ship. The SS Vickery took him to the northernmost island of Japan. On August 6th, he arrived in Yokohama, Japan. He left Yokohama on the USS Carrington and arrived in San Francisco on October 15th of the same year. Leaving remnants of personal stories of radiating personal and political influence, he still yearned to be back in Europe. So at this point, before transcontinental railroads, the quickest way to the east coast of the U.S. was through Panama. So he goes through Panama. Stopping in Boston sometime between Panama and December 27th, once he arrived in London, he actually met some comrades from the revolutions of 1848. Feeling inspired by seeing his comrades, he left for New York, and after leaving New York, arrived in Liverpool on December 27th. In the light of his travels, he immediately immersed himself with the revolutionary movement. He left to see his old teacher and friend, Alexander Herzen, and began to plan his next course of action. After making a brief trip to Italy and involving himself in a small campaign of Italian-Slavic unity, he reunited with his wife. In 1863, he first started to develop his ideas of anarchism. He implemented an idea of a secret organization of revolutionaries to carry on propaganda work and prepare for direct action. And I thought that this was incredibly interesting because I actually found a source that said that Marx refuted the idea of a people's revolution. But I have to speculate because Marx and Bakunin hated each other, and I think maybe Marx was just trying to put Bakunin down. So, but I thought that this was significant, and I believe Paul Talley actually said Lenin was inspired by this one piece from Bakunin. It was the only thing that he thought had any merit. So he writes, this is a biography, anybody should check it out if you're interested in Bakunin. He says, in contrast to the top-down model of revolution, Bakunin held that revolutions are never made by individuals or even secret societies. They make themselves, produced by the force of affairs, by the movement of events and facts. They are prepared in the depth of the instinctive consciousness of the masses. Then they burst out, instigated by what often appears to be frivolous causes. All that a secret, well-organized society can do is to help at birth of a revolution by spreading the ideas that correspond to the instincts of the masses, and to organize not the revolutionary army, the army must always be the people, but a sort of revolutionary general staff composed of individuals who are devoted, energetic, intelligent, and most important, sincere and lacking ambition and vanity, capable of serving as intermediaries between the revolutionary idea and the popular instinct. So, yeah, that has huge political and historical implications, like I said, specifically with Lenin. So after his brief campaign of promoting Italian Slavic unity, he went on to promote what he called the Alliance of Revolutionary Socialists, based on this idea. He recruited Italians, Frenchmen, Scandinavians, and Slavs, and by 1866 he informed Herzen of his work. He then had further contacts in Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, and England. The alliance, Bakunin boasted, declares itself atheist. It wants the abolition of cults, substitution of science for faith, and human justice for divine justice. In Catechism of a Revolutionary, he demanded opposition towards religion and the state, advocating absolute rejection of every authority. In 1840, Bakunin led a failed uprising in Lyon which foreshadowed the Paris Commune. Its organization mirrored the exact composition that the Paris Communards, the Paris Commune, used just not a year later. He wrote to the Frenchmen, "We must spread our principles, not with words, but with deeds, for this is the most popular, the most potent, and the most irresistible form of propaganda." And this is what became to be known as propaganda of the deed, carried by, of course, Alexander Bergman, who was imprisoned for advocating the death of President McKinley. In 1868, he joined the Geneva section of the First Internationale. He encompassed the arguments from mutualists, American individualist anarchists, and his own anarcho-collectivists against Marxism. For 4 years, the battle raged between Bakunin and Marx, and it's highly arguable that somebody could give a presentation on this fight, because it went on for so long. It was so full of shit talk, and they all just, I think Marx called Bakunin a raging ass at one point. So they were just making stabs at each other. It was obvious that Marx had inherent followers from the theoretical groundwork he laid. Bakunin, on the other hand, struggled to maintain his reputation from his activism. In 1872, Mikhail Bakunin was expelled from the Internationale because of his secret organizations and the history of his political work. And in this case, it was obviously referred to the newly organized Alliance of Revolutionary Socialists. Bakunin helped head a separate working men's association, similar to the Internationale later in Switzerland. Bakunin went on to die from the effects of bad health. There's nothing more specific than that I found, in Bern, Switzerland in 1876. So that's it. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes.
What were you?
Well, I was going to sort of touch on, you mentioned this quote you read at length on Bakunin and his secret societies. At first I would ask, you speculated, but do you know where the quote came from? How, or at least the quote as it pertains to its influence on Lenin?
I think it was some source on the internet, and it was about the battle between Marx and Bakunin. Mm-hmm. I could get back to you for further details on that.
Sure.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
That's good enough. I mean, I guess we can sort of play with it as it is. But, I mean, it seems to me what Lenin was arguing as far as, I mean, he argued, right, this is mostly from what is to be done. But it's sort of like, oh yeah, we should have a vanguard, which, again, most theoretically advanced aspects of the working class, students, intellectuals, they become full-time revolutionaries, disseminate class consciousness via agitation and propaganda to the people. once the people raise a sufficient level of class consciousness, we seize the state, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But it seems to me what Bakunin was arguing was more or less, I mean, obviously he's not going to go along seizing the state and doing the dictatorship of the proletariat, but it's sort of this, oh, well, when the people have enough consciousness and maybe give them guns, like maybe then a revolution will happen. Do you think that's what he's arguing, or do you think it's more like actual structured and organized?
I would speculate, because of his past and his activism, I think it would be a combination of the objective conditions and his alliance of revolutionary socialists. However, my criticism to Bakunin is, in some cases, he didn't argue for armed struggle, and in some cases, he actually fought against it. And I think the groundwork that he laid for propaganda of the deed, I feel like that was the downfall of anarchism.